The fifth rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, November 14th, at 9:47 a.m. It was printed on cream-colored letterhead with a gold embossed crest at the top, the kind of stationery that costs more per sheet than some families spend on dinner. The letter was signed by Victoria Ashford Crane, Managing Director of Ashford Luxury Properties, and it contained exactly 43 words. Marcus Devereux read every single one of them while standing in the marble lobby of the Ashford residences on the corner of Bleecker and Charles Street in Manhattan's West Village. The lobby smelled like sandalwood and money. The doorman watched him read. The concierge watched him read. And Victoria Ashford Crane herself watched him read from behind the frosted glass partition of her ground floor office. Her arms folded across a charcoal Stella McCartney blazer. Her chin tilted at the precise angle of someone who had already decided the outcome before the conversation began. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Devereux, after careful consideration of your application and supporting financial documentation, Ashford Luxury Properties must respectfully decline your tenancy request for the fifth and final time. We wish you well in your housing search. Regards, V. Ashford Crane." She had underlined the word final. Marcus folded the letter along its original crease, slid it into the inside pocket of his canvas work jacket, the one with the frayed cuff and the faint smell of drywall dust, and turned toward the revolving door without saying a word. His hands were still. His face was still. His breathing was still. Victoria Ashford Crane did not know that the man she had just rejected for the fifth time in writing held controlling interest in the real estate holding company that owned the ground beneath her building, the building next to it, the parking structure behind it, and the entire commercial block stretching from Bleecker to West 4th. She did not know that the quiet man in the canvas jacket had spent the last 14 months deliberately suppressing that information. She did not know that her fifth rejection letter would be the last professional document she ever signed from that office. Don't look away. The mistake she stamped and sealed that morning was about to cost her everything she had built over 15 years. But this story does not begin in a marble lobby. It begins 7 months earlier, in a one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a walk-up in Astoria, Queens, where the radiator clanked every 40 seconds and the kitchen window looked out onto the back of a laundromat exhaust vent. Marcus Devereux woke every morning at 5:15. He did not use an alarm. His body had learned the rhythm of necessity years ago, back when he was 24 and his wife Elena had died from a pulmonary embolism 11 days after giving birth to their daughter, Celeste. That was 8 years ago. The grief had not left. It had simply changed shape, from a scream to a hum, from a wound to a scar that ached in cold weather. He would stand at the kitchen counter in the gray morning light and make 2 lunches. One for himself, turkey on wheat, no mayo, an apple, a bottle of water. One for Celeste, peanut butter and strawberry jam with the crusts removed, baby carrots arranged in a circle because she liked circles, a juice box and a note. Always a note. Today's note said, "You are braver than you think. Love, Dad." He wrote a new one every single morning. He had not missed a day in 4 years. By 6:40 he walked Celeste 6 blocks to PS 234, where she attended 3rd grade. She held his hand the entire way. Not because she was scared, because she knew he needed it. At the school gate, she looked up at him with Elena's dark brown eyes and said the same thing she said every morning. "Have a good day, Daddy." He crouched to her level. "You too, baby." She walked inside. He watched her until the door closed. Then he turned north toward the subway. What the world saw was a general contractor in worn boots carrying a metal lunchbox. What the world did not see was the man who had quietly co-founded Meridian Capital Holdings 12 years ago with his college roommate, James Okafor, and had stepped away from active operations after Elena's death to raise Celeste full-time. He retained 41% ownership. James ran the day-to-day. The portfolio had grown to include 14 commercial properties across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Jersey City, collectively valued at $212 million. Marcus chose construction work because it kept his hands busy and his mind present. He did not need the money. He needed the rhythm. He needed to feel the weight of something real at the end of each day. But the apartment in Astoria was failing Celeste. The mold in the bathroom had returned for the 3rd time. The nearest playground had been closed for asbestos remediation since June. Her school was a 40-minute commute each way, and she was getting tired. He could see it in the way she fell asleep on the subway with her backpack still on, her small hands resting on a library book she was too exhausted to finish. So Marcus began looking for a new home. Not a penthouse. Not a showpiece. A 2-bedroom apartment in a safe building near a good school. Somewhere Celeste could have her own room and a window that opened onto something other than exhaust. He found the Ashford Residences in the West Village. And that is where the trouble started. The first application was submitted on April 3rd. Marcus filled it out by hand at the leasing office on the ground floor, while Celeste sat beside him drawing pictures of birds in a small notebook. He listed his occupation as general contractor. He listed his annual income from that work, $68,000 before taxes. He did not list Meridian Capital Holdings. He did not list the investment distributions. He did not list the offshore trust Elena had set up before she died. He wanted to be accepted as the man he lived as, not the man the ledger said he was. The first rejection came 4 days later. Form letter. No explanation required. He applied again on May 11th. This time, he included 3 additional references, a credit report with an 804 score, and a letter from Celeste's school principal affirming their family's character. The second rejection arrived on May 19th, same letterhead, same gold crest. This time, a handwritten note in the margin. Unit availability limited. We encourage you to explore other residential options in the borough. The third rejection, June 28th, included a new clause. Victoria Ashford Crane had begun requiring an additional financial disclosure form, one Marcus had never seen at any other property in Manhattan. It asked for net worth verification, asset declarations, and a personal statement explaining the applicant's lifestyle alignment with the Ashford residential community. He filled it out honestly, listing only his contractor income and his savings. Lifestyle alignment, he wrote, meant providing a safe home for his daughter near her future school. Rejected. July 9th. No note this time. Just the stamp. The fourth rejection, September 1st, was the one that shifted everything. Marcus had arrived at the leasing office to deliver his application in person. Celeste was with him. School had not started yet, and the babysitter had cancelled. She sat in one of the leather chairs in the lobby, her legs swinging above the polished floor, reading a chapter book about a girl who could talk to foxes. Victoria Ashford Crane stepped out of her office. She was tall, angular, and immaculately assembled. Pearl earrings, blowout, heels that clicked on marble like a metronome. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Celeste. She looked back at Marcus. Mr. Devereaux, I want to be transparent with you because I respect your persistence, even if I find it somewhat misguided. This building maintains a certain standard, a financial standard, a professional standard, and frankly, a social standard. And while I'm sure you're a perfectly adequate father, the reality is that your application simply does not meet the threshold we require for residency here. Marcus looked at her. My daughter can hear you, he said. Victoria smiled. It did not reach her eyes. Children are resilient, Mr. Devereaux. I'm sure she hears all sorts of things. She turned and walked back into her office. The frosted glass door closed with a soft click. Marcus stood still for 3 full seconds. Then he walked to the leather chair, crouched in front of Celeste, and gently closed her book with one hand. Ready to go. Celeste looked at him with those dark brown eyes. Daddy, why doesn't she want us to live here? Some people have rules, baby. Are the rules fair? He took a breath. Not always. They walked out through the revolving door together, and Marcus did not look back. That night, after Celeste was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table in the dark apartment with the 4 rejection letters spread in front of him like a losing hand. The radiator clanked. The laundromat exhaust hummed. He picked up his phone and called James Okafor. James. Marcus. It's midnight. I know. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. The Bleecker Charles block. Is it still in the acquisition pipeline? Silence. Then James spoke carefully. It's been flagged for 18 months. The holding company that owns the ground lease is looking to divest. We've had preliminary conversations. Why? Move on it. Marcus, that's a $47 million position. You want to tell me why? Not yet. He hung up. He did not explain. He did not ask for advice. He sat in the quiet apartment and listened to his daughter breathe through the thin wall between their rooms. Meanwhile, someone else had noticed the pattern. Her name was Diane Lamb. She was a tenant rights attorney who kept a small office on the second floor of a building across the street from the Ashford residences. She had watched Marcus enter and leave that lobby 4 times over 5 months. She had watched him each time. Always calm, always quiet, always holding his daughter's hand. And she had watched Victoria Ashford Crane's face through the frosted glass each time. Always cold, always dismissive, always certain of her authority. Diane had begun pulling records. What she found made her sit down. In the previous 3 years, the Ashford residences had rejected 41 applications from single parents, people of color, and working-class professionals, while approving every single application from couples earning above $300,000 annually. The approval rate for applicants who matched Marcus's demographic profile was 0%. Not low. 0. Diane Lamb did not contact Marcus. Not yet. She was quiet about her work. She was building a case. And then the 5th rejection came. November 14th. The one with the word final underlined twice. Marcus called Celeste's after-school program from the lobby payphone. Hey baby. How was your day? Good. We made volcanoes. Real ones. She giggled. Baking soda ones. That's even better. I'll pick you up at 5. Okay. Daddy. Yeah. Are you okay? He paused. I'm okay. He was not okay. But his voice was steady, and that was what she needed to hear. He should have broken. 5 written rejections. Public dismissal in front of his child. A woman who had looked at his daughter and decided she was not worth the marble floors she sat above. He did not break. He folded the letter and walked out into the cold November air. 3 days later, on November 17th, Marcus received a certified letter from a law firm he did not recognize. Barrett, Sloan and Whitfield LLP, attorneys representing Ashford luxury properties. The letter informed him that any further attempts to apply for residency at the Ashford residences would be considered harassment under New York Civil Court statute, and that Victoria Ashford Crane was prepared to seek a restraining order if he appeared on the property again. He read the letter at the kitchen counter while Celeste ate cereal at the folding table behind him. The threat was not just legal. It was designed to humiliate, to make a man who had done nothing wrong feel like a criminal for wanting a safe place for his daughter to sleep. The letter had been copied to the building's board of directors, to the leasing office staff, and, inexplicably, to the principal of PS 234 Celeste School. Victoria Ashford Crane had sent a copy of a harassment threat letter to his 8-year-old daughter's elementary school, as though Marcus Devereaux were a danger to the community rather than a father trying to join it. He set the letter down on the counter and placed both hands flat on the laminate surface, fingers spread, as though he were trying to hold the apartment itself together through the pressure of his palms. The gray morning light came through the window and landed across his knuckles, illuminating the white scars from years of drywall work, the calluses that had formed in layers like geological strata, the quiet evidence of a man who had never stopped building even when the thing he was building was invisible to everyone but his daughter. He could end this in a single phone call. One call to James. One disclosure of his ownership stake. One press release, one board meeting, one reveal that the man Victoria Ashford Crane had rejected 5 times and threatened with legal action was, in fact, the majority stakeholder in the entity that controlled the ground lease beneath every square foot of her professional life. He could walk into that marble lobby tomorrow morning and fire her in front of the same doorman and concierge who had watched him read her rejection letters. He picked up his phone. He looked at the screen for 11 seconds. Then he set it down, poured Celeste a glass of orange juice, and sat across from her at the folding table. "What are you reading?" he asked. "The Fox book. She's in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The other animals don't believe she can talk. They think she's making it up." "What does she do?" Celeste turned a page. She keeps talking. Marcus watched his daughter read. The radiator clanked. The morning was cold and gray, and the kitchen smelled like cereal and orange juice and the particular sweetness of a child's unwashed hair before school. He did not make the phone call. He did not expose Victoria Ashford Crane. He chose again to absorb the blow rather than deliver one, because delivering one would mean becoming the kind of man who used power as a weapon, and he had promised Elena, in the delivery room, holding her hand while the monitor screamed, that he would be the kind of father who taught Celeste that strength was not the ability to destroy but the willingness to endure. That night, after Celeste was asleep, the apartment felt smaller than it had ever been. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark. He did not turn on a light. He did not open his phone. He sat with his hands between his knees and listened to the sounds of the building. The couple arguing 2 floors up, the television bleeding through the wall from the apartment next door, the water pipes groaning like an old man trying to stand. And underneath all of it, the soft, rhythmic breathing of his daughter in the next room, steady as a metronome, steady as a heartbeat, steady as the only thing in his life that had never failed him. He thought about Elena. He thought about the morning she died. How the hospital hallway had been so white and so still, how the nurse had placed Celeste in his arms and said, "She needs you now." How the weight of a 7-pound infant had felt heavier than anything he had ever carried on a construction site, heavier than steel beams, heavier than concrete, heavier than grief itself. He did not cry. He had not cried in 8 years. Not because he was too strong. Because he was afraid that if he started, the sound would wake Celeste, and she would come to the doorway in her pajamas with the strawberry pattern, and she would see her father broken, and he could not allow that. He could not allow her to carry that image. So he sat in the dark, and he breathed, and he waited for the night to end. Sometime around 2 in the morning he heard a sound. A step. Small ones. The creak of the hallway floorboard that always gave away her midnight trips to the bathroom. But she did not go to the bathroom. She appeared in his doorway. She stood there in the strawberry pajamas with her hair tangled and her fox book pressed against her chest. She did not say anything. She walked to the bed and sat beside him. She leaned her head against his arm. They sat together in the quiet dark. Neither of them spoke. After a long time she whispered, "The fox one." He put his arm around her. "Yeah." She kept talking until they listened. He kissed the top of her head. She fell asleep against his side. He carried her back to bed, tucked the fox book under her arm, and stood in the hallway with his hands at his sides, watching her sleep. The stillness held. What Marcus did not know was that 2 things had already been set in motion that would converge within 72 hours. The first was James Okafor. The Bleecker Charles block acquisition had closed on November 15th, the day after the 5th rejection. Meridian Capital Holdings now owned the ground lease, the commercial sublease, and the building management contract for every property on that block, including the Ashford residences. James had not told Marcus yet because the final paperwork was still being recorded with the city. But it was done. The ink was dry. The second was Diane Lamb. The tenant rights attorney across the street had completed her investigation. She had documented 41 discriminatory rejections. She had obtained internal emails from a former Ashford leasing agent, emails in which Victoria Ashford Crane had explicitly instructed her staff to flag and reject applications from, in her words, single-income households, single-parent applicants, and anyone who presents as financially inconsistent with the Ashford brand. Diane had filed a formal complaint with the New York City Commission on Human Rights on November 16th. The complaint named Victoria Ashford Crane personally. 2 rivers running toward the same point. And Marcus, sitting in the dark, knew about neither one. The morning of November 21st was cold and gray. Marcus dropped Celeste at school at 6:40. She held his hand the entire way. At the gate, she looked up at him. "Have a good day, Daddy." "You too, baby." He watched her walk inside. The door closed. He turned toward the subway. His phone rang at 8:15. It was James. "Marcus. Done. The Bleecker Charles block recorded with the city yesterday. Meridian owns the ground lease, the sublease, and the management contract. All of it." Marcus stopped walking. He stood on the sidewalk in Astoria with the cold wind pulling at his canvas jacket. All of it, he repeated. All of it. Including the Ashford residences. You need to come in today. There are decisions to make. What kind of decisions? The kind where you now control who manages that building, and who doesn't. Marcus was quiet for a long time. City bus passed. A woman walked her dog. The world continued to move around a man who was standing perfectly still. I'll be there at 10, he said. At 10:07 a.m., Marcus Devereaux walked into the Meridian Capital Holdings conference room on the 32nd floor of a glass tower on Park Avenue. He was still wearing the canvas jacket. He had not changed his boots. James Okafor sat at the head of the table with 3 attorneys and a stack of documents 6 inches high. At the same moment, 43 blocks south, a different meeting was beginning. Victoria Ashford Crane arrived at her ground floor office at the Ashford Residences at 10:15 to find 2 investigators from the New York City Commission on Human Rights seated in her lobby. They presented her with a formal notice of investigation based on the complaint filed by Diane Lamb. The notice cited potential violations of the New York City human rights law, specifically unlawful discriminatory practices in housing based on familial status, source of income, and race. The doorman watched her face change. The concierge watched her face change. Victoria read the notice 3 times. Her hands were not steady. At 11 a.m., while Victoria was still seated in her office with the investigators, her assistant knocked on the frosted glass door and handed her a second document. This one was from the New York City Register's office. It was a property transfer notification informing her that the ground lease and management contract for the Ashford Residences had been transferred to Meridian Capital Holdings, effective November 20th. She did not recognize the name. At 11:47 a.m., she received a third document, this one hand-delivered by a Meridian Capital courier. It was a formal notice of management review, signed by the controlling partner of Meridian Capital Holdings. The name at the bottom was Marcus Devereaux. The lobby went very quiet. Victoria Ashford Crane stood up from her desk. She walked to the frosted glass door. She opened it. She looked across the marble lobby toward the revolving entrance as though expecting to see him standing there. The man in the canvas jacket, the man with the worn cuffs, the man she had rejected 5 times in writing and threatened with a restraining order. He was not there. Not yet. At 2 p.m., Marcus arrived at the Ashford Residences. He did not use the revolving door. He walked through the service entrance on the side of the building. The same entrance the maintenance staff used, the same entrance the cleaning crews used, the same entrance Victoria Ashford Crane had never once walked through in 15 years of managing the property. He walked through the back hallway, past the boiler room, past the supply closets, past the staff break room where 3 maintenance workers looked up from their lunches and watched a man in a canvas jacket walk with a stillness that made the air feel heavier. He entered the lobby from the service corridor. Victoria was standing behind her desk. The investigators had left. Her assistant was gone. The frosted glass door was open. She was alone. She looked at him. He looked at her. The doorman, Gerald, stood at his post by the revolving door. His hands were clasped behind his back. He did not move. But his eyes moved, from Victoria to Marcus and back again. The concierge, a young woman named Priya, stood behind the marble counter. She had been the one who had watched Marcus read every rejection letter. She had been the one who had smiled at Celeste each time. She watched now with her hands flat on the counter, her breath held. Victoria spoke first. Mr. Devereaux, I want you to understand that every decision I made regarding your application was consistent with the standards this building has maintained for over a decade, and I will not apologize for upholding those standards simply because the ownership structure has changed. Marcus stood in the center of the marble lobby. His hands were at his sides. His voice was quiet. Your standards rejected 41 families. Victoria blinked. That's not. It's documented. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. What are you going to do? Marcus looked at her for a long time. The lobby was so quiet that Gerald could hear the clock above the concierge desk ticking. Priya's hands pressed harder against the marble. I'm going to find a manager who lets families in, he said. 7 words. He did not raise his voice. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He turned and walked back toward the service corridor. And then he stopped, because standing at the end of the hallway, holding a Fox book against her chest, was Celeste. James had picked her up from school early. He had brought her here because he believed, rightly, that she should see where her father stood. Not the marble, not the gold crest, not the leather chairs. She should see the room where someone had told her father he was not enough, and she should see him standing in the center of it, unbroken. Celeste looked at her father. He looked at her. She walked toward him and took his hand. Gerald, the doorman, straightened his jacket. Priya, the concierge, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Victoria Ashford Crane sat down slowly in her chair and looked at the 5 rejection letters still filed neatly in the cabinet behind her desk. The letters she had signed. The letters she had underlined. The letters that had cost her everything. Marcus and Celeste walked out through the front entrance. This time the revolving door moved for them. 6 months later, in May, the Ashford residences had a new name. Marcus changed it to the Elena, after the woman who had given him both his greatest love and his deepest wound. The building now operated under an open admission policy with income-blind leasing. 14 of the 41 families who had been previously rejected were offered apartments at adjusted rates. 11 accepted. Victoria Ashford Crane was removed from her position on November 22, the day after the reversal. The Commission on Human Rights investigation resulted in a formal finding of discriminatory practices. She was fined $175,000 personally and barred from property management in New York City for 5 years. She did not contest the ruling. Diane Lamb, the tenant rights attorney, was retained by Meridian Capital Holdings as an independent compliance auditor for all 14 properties in the portfolio. Gerald, the doorman, remained at his post. He requested only one change: a small bench in the lobby where children could sit while their parents handled paperwork. It was installed in December. Celeste helped choose the color. He chose blue. Marcus and Celeste moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of the Elena in January. The apartment had a window that looked out onto a courtyard with a magnolia tree. Celeste had her own room for the first time in her life. She taped every lunch note her father had ever written onto the wall above her bed. 4 years of small folded papers, each one a sentence long. On the first morning in the new apartment, Marcus stood at the kitchen counter in the gray light and made 2 lunches. Celeste appeared in the doorway in her pajamas. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." "Did you win?" He turned and looked at her. He crouched to her level, the way he always did, and took her hands in his. "I didn't fight," he said. "I just didn't leave." She thought about that. Then she nodded, the way children do when they understand something they cannot yet articulate. They walked to school together that morning, 6 blocks through the West Village, and she held his hand the entire way. If you watched this far, then you know this story was never about revenge. It was about a man who let the world see exactly who he was and waited for the truth to speak louder than 5 rejection letters ever could.